my name is Dr. Vanessa Theme Ament, and this is
I'm Dana Polan
Polan
from NYU.
We're going to be discussing the film Young at Heart. Dana and I are going to be discussing this film each from different perspectives. I'm going to let Dana start because he's been writing about Frank Sinatra, and I'm sure he's going to have a lot to say about this and the film. And I'm going to also, I think we're going to relate it to the first film, Four Daughters, and kind of talk a little bit about Fannie Hurst's story. So it's going to be kind of an interesting discussion because there's a lot to relate about the story, the first film, and the second film. And I think we'll each be taking different perspectives on it. So I'm going to let Dana start.
I don't know if you know, but this is a remake. It was originally a film from 1938 called Four Daughters, instead of Three Daughters, which the remake cuts it down to three, maybe.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. So and it was part of a franchise. It comes out at the exact moment when MGM, for example, is doing the Andy Hardy franchise, and it's again this kind of celebration of Americana, the values of small town. Four Daughters was Warner Brothers. This is also Warner Brothers, yeah, which is probably why they had the rights to do it. The original was, as I said, was a franchise. It led to three other films. Daughters Courageous, Four Wives, and Four Mothers.
Yes.
And what's weird is Daughters Courageous, which was the follow-up, it was very successful, the first film. One of the gimmicks of the film was that three of the daughters were played by the Lane sisters, Priscilla, Lola, and Rosemary. Gail Page played the fourth. And because it did really well, they decided to do I can't call it a sequel because the second film, Daughters Courageous, is the exact same cast. So the three Lane sisters, Gail Page, Claude Rains, who plays the dad in the original, Jeff Lynne, who plays the Gig Young role, and John Garfield, who plays the Barney Sloane role. They have different names. In the original, he's Mickey. The second film, Daughters Courageous, it's the exact same cast, but a completely different story. It just uses everybody, but nothing to do plot-wise with the first one. They're living in Monterey. Claude Rains is the dad, but he's left the family. He comes back to the family. John Garfield plays a Latino boy, rebellious, and then they decide to go back to start making sequels to the original Four Daughters. In the original, the suicide scene is the exact same up to the moment when he takes a cigarette and he's in the hospital. And in the original, he dies at that moment. In the remake, the Sinatra character survives. I'll come back to that in a second. In the original, he dies, and she re-meets the equivalent of the Alex character. In the original, they had a meet-cute scene over the picket fence, and it ends with her meeting up with him again. And the implication is they're going to get back together, which they do. And the sequel is all about the fact that she's pregnant with the John Garfield character's child, but she's worried that basically the Alec character won't accept that he's not the father of their child, and it's all about his difficulties with that. John Garfield comes back as flashbacks, and they say with permission of John Garfield, he plays Mickey again. There's some debate about why in the remake why Barney survives. Historically, there seems to be three different explanations. One is that it's a Doris Day film. Her husband produced it, and she wanted a perkier ending. The second is Sinatra as a Catholic, whereas John Garfield was Jewish. Sinatra as a Catholic didn't want to be seen on screen committing suicide. It's a venal sin. The third possibility is that Sinatra had actually died in previous films. He dies in From Here to Eternity. He dies in Suddenly, and didn't want to be associated with always dying in films.
So I want to start by saying this is my favorite Frank Sinatra film. And the reason that I wanted to do this is because I know that Dana's written about Frank Sinatra. And I want to talk a little bit about my perspective on this, being a singer and actor who has followed all of Sinatra's singing and acting, and also knows his grandnephew, George, over at the museum here in town. And one of the things that resonates with me with Sinatra, and I'll talk a little bit about Doris Day, and I want to talk about Ethel Barrymore, and the way that the roles changed with the father and the aunt from the first film and this film, and the roles of the sisters. Because I think it's really important, because it has to do with the 30s and the 50s, because musicals is an area of expertise of mine. One of the things that happens that's different between the two versions of the film is that in the 30s, in the Depression, the father is very stern and controlling and a bit chastising and negative with his daughters. And in this version, he's much more gentle and open and warm. And that's very different. In the first version, the aunt is sort of weak and not very strong. In this version, Ethel Barrymore really is the matriarch and runs the household.
Right. And she watches sports.
And
right?
she watches sports, boxing. And another way that it's very different is we have to remember this is post World War II. So during the Depression, women were not powerful. Post World War II, they had been working in the factories and they had been empowered. And so now we are in the high where America is now the leader of the world. And women have come back into the home, but they were in the factories and they have found empowerment and they have found their voice. So we have an empowered female culture. So it's very different, because Ethel Barrymore, who in my opinion was the best of the three Barrymores, I found her to be the strongest and the best actor of the three. So now she's the one who is really the glue character in the entire film. And she's the one who sees through Barney from the very beginning. In the first version with John Garfield, who's brilliant, he comes in and he's very surly and very urban. And in the production notes, Richard Edwards had written a paper on this, and I read some of the notes that came from the production notes. And there was an emphasis on keeping Garfield cleaned up and looking really clean, making sure he looked clean. Now, I come from the industry. I have been in the industry most of my life, and I'm a third generation because my grandfather worked at RKO under Kennedy, and my mother was an assistant choreographer in movies. I'm third generation. I am showbiz. I know what that is code for, because John Garfield was Jewish. Keep him looking clean. That's extremely anti-Semitic in LA. And I find it really offensive, but those are the production notes. Keep him looking clean, make sure he looks clean. This is what Breen, we've got to make sure it passes the Breen test. Well, that is, Garfield is an untested thing in the Curtiz film. And he comes in, and they want to make sure that he's not offensive to the Breen committee. And they want to make sure he passes the censors. And he comes off much tougher and much more cynical. Then we get Sinatra. Now, I want to talk about Sinatra because I have a very different view of him than ever is talked about. I think the magic of Sinatra is the sensitivity and vulnerability that he brings to his roles. One of the things that is never talked about, and I talked about this with George, his grandnephew, is that I've always felt that this was an incredibly sensitive man who grew up in an era and in a neighborhood and in a world where that is not okay. He had a difficult birth. They thought he was stillborn. He was delivered by forceps, had scars on the left side of his face. He's always shot from the right. And was skinny and little. And so there's a sense of vulnerability his entire life. And he has this tough guy attitude, but the thing that comes through in his singing and the way he approached the text of singing, where he focuses on the words, and the way that he approaches his acting, the magic of it is the vulnerability. And what Laurie responds to is the vulnerability. And the reason he feels like a victim is the vulnerability. And what Laurie sees and what Aunt Jess sees is the vulnerability and the sense of tenderness. And that's what they respond to. And that's what they want to help him see is okay. That's not discussed, but women feel it. And the Gig Young character, and Gig Young was a mess, my God. He killed his wife and committed suicide. What a case. We know Sinatra tried to kill himself, but Gig Young was no cakewalk. He comes off as Alex, arrogant and controlling and full of himself, and he puts down Barney all the way through. In the first film, Jeffrey Lynn is extremely controlling. He walks in and he's telling everybody where to sit, but nobody comments that the character is controlling. In this version, Doris Day says he's going to come in, he's going to be controlling, he's going to be arrogant. She is empowered and notices this about the character. It's fascinating how this text has changed. So what's really interesting to me is that the Barney character is the outsider who actually, in both films, John Garfield and Frank Sinatra, the character can see and read people because he is the outsider and he's sitting back and he's watching. He's not in the middle of it and oblivious, he's watching. And Aunt Jess in this second version is watching and reading people. And that's why she sees Barney. And there's a recognition. And there's actually a simpatico going on. And you see her smile and actually have affection for him. So what I love about this role with Frank Sinatra, because I have an appreciation for the sensitivity of the straight male who is not allowed to be sensitive. And that's the toxicity in our culture. The straight man who has to hide his sensitivity. And the beauty of the Frank Sinatra performances in so many of his films is he is allowed as the artist in his singing and his acting to bring out the sensitivity and the vulnerability. And it comes through so much, and there's so much empathy. And we know from the stories how loyal he was, how he stood up for his friends, how he was always there and had his back, how he stood up for Sammy Davis Jr. And this vulnerability and this sensitivity is the magic of his performances. And that's why I love him in this role. He is vulnerable, he is sensitive, and Laurie and Jessie see it. And all of the women see it. But the one who really sees it is Laurie. And that's what she responds to. And that's why she wants to help him and empower him to see that he is worthy. And the reason the ending does not seem insincere to me is because in the 50s, musicals had to have happy endings because it was the utopia of America. Sometimes it's a little forced in the 50s. But in this particular film, there's something else that works here. There's a sense of redemption. Because in the first film, we don't know that that the character is pregnant. But in this film, it actually comes out. So in the first film, when the character is handing Mickey money, it's because he thinks he's a loser and you need my money. But in this version, it's because I can't tell him he's about to be a father, but I want to give him money to help him because he's about to be a father. But Barney doesn't know that yet. And that's the reason Alex gives him the money. But he doesn't know it. And also in this version, there's the redemption of her saying, "You're going to be a father." And that is the redemption of him having a reason to stay alive. So that for me is why I think the ending works, because he may slip into what may be a coma, we don't know, but it's that message of, you are going to be a father, and for once he really has a reason to stay alive. And so I think the reason the ending works for me is for that reason. And there's one other thing I want to point out, and then I'm going to throw it back to you. At the very beginning, we see couples passing through in the neighborhood, and they're all white. At the very ending, there's a couple screen right that's walking by, and it's a black couple. And that we're at the very beginning of the civil rights movement happening, and so walking away from the camera is a black couple. It's very subtle, but I noticed it, that there's a couple walking away, camera right, and it's a black couple. And I think it was very subtle, and it was a very important choice, and it just slips by. And if you look carefully, it's a black couple walking away from the camera, screen right. And we are in 1954, same year as Suddenly, same year as From Here to Eternity, and it's a black couple. And I noticed that, and I thought, nice choice, very subtle, just goes by. We are making a statement, but it's very quiet. So those are some things that I just wanted to share.
Thank you. That was great. Couple comments, maybe developing from some of the things you said. Earlier, I said this is a film about small town or about Americana. What's interesting to me is, in fact, it's not absolutely a small town. We discover that there is a downtown that
Right.
is urban. When Laurie's
In Connecticut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When Laurie's with Alex doing Christmas shopping, it's a wonderful, bright, but then somewhere else in the same town is this saloon that's noisy,
Yeah.
has this gruff manager, and that's where the Sinatra character, we see him in that environment.
Yeah.
And we don't know where it is exactly, except we're also told it's downtown. And I always find that interesting, that
Yeah.
this can be both white picket fence, the neighborhood, and then this other place that he inhabits. And it's interesting, going back to your idea about vulnerability, it's interesting that the songs he sings are songs of vulnerable masculinity.
Yeah.
Especially the first song he sings in the saloon is Somebody to Watch Over Me, and he wants Laurie and basically to be that, and he keeps looking over for her approval. The song Someone to Watch Over Me came from a musical where it's a woman. It was a 20s musical. I'm going to forget it was Gertrude Lawrence.
Gershwin.
And she but I'm going to forget the name of the musical.
Yeah.
She sings to the mirror, and so it's a woman singing to herself, and it's a feminine song. And it's interesting that Sinatra, thought of as macho, is actually singing about his dependency, his need to be watched over. He wants a guardian angel. You know, that's not what men are typically supposed to be doing. Your thing about not clean, you know, Garfield should be clean. Yeah. It's one thing that's interesting, and I want to come back to the point about the black people at the very end. This is also a film that emphasizes a kind of sweaty ethnicity. First of all, Sinatra's skin tone is darker. Mm-hmm. I mean, he is Italian, and there's even a line about how he was Italian, changed his name, and you see him when he's next to absolutely alabaster Doris Day, that he has a darker skin. But being ethnic, he's allowed to be disheveled, he's allowed to be sweaty. When he's in the car, even though the motivation is that it's been snowing, he just looks like he's dripping.
She even makes a comment about his tie.
Yeah, right. But in the car at the suicide moment, he's just dripping with liquid.
Yeah.
He's not clean. The other thing, the idea of looking, I think, is really interesting. there's also that moment where Jessie looks at the different couples and she sees that the one daughter is not holding Bob's hand. They're just sitting side by side, and she frowns.
Yes.
She knows what's going on, and she sees who's happy, who's not happy. What interests me, building on that, is how much this is a film about looking in general. I mean, we obviously are an audience watching a film. The camera moves in at the beginning through a window. It symmetrically moves out of that window at the very end. And if you looked at it, did a shot by shot or a scene by scene, there's a lot of looking in this film.
Yes, a lot of close-ups.
And a lot of, what happens when Laurie comes to see, when she comes back from her talk with Barney about the wedding. Mm-hmm. She looks through the window of the kitchen, and she sees Anne crying. So it's a film where everybody is at windows, looking through windows, checking on people, seeing how they're doing. Maybe we should open up if those of you who saw it with us. Any thoughts, comments?
I'm really fascinated by the musical choices because on one level, Young at Heart is a metaphor of a kind of blissful domesticity that never really quite fit. When I see Sinatra in the saloon singing the saloon songs, one for my baby, one for the road, or someone to watch over me, the kind of, suicide song Sinatra fits. Like I feel it. I feel him at his most authentic. And I feel there's something artificial about like Young at Heart. And that's where, again, I'm wondering how you both read both the way that Sinatra might be at his most authentic outside of the appeal to domesticity when everything in this movie is about a drive to get him to be domestic, which almost seems counter to his natural inclination. To me, the script gets it right that this is the guy you expect to go to South America, not to swerve back to the white picket fence in Connecticut. So I'm just curious about how you might see the saloon songs against Young at Heart, which feels like a song from a different universe.
Right, but I mean, Vanessa was saying this. There are different sides to Sinatra in terms of personality and also songs he picks. He does upbeat albums. I've Got the World on a String. Fly Me to the Moon, Come Fly With Me.
Yeah.
And Young at Heart is of that side. Now, what's interesting in this film, and maybe this goes back to some of the things we've both been saying, it's interesting that I said that there's no non-narrative song. Young at Heart is non-narrative. It's over the credits, and then it's over the end credits. You don't see him singing it. The three times he sings in the saloon, they're all downbeat songs. And that's a different milieu, and that's why I think it's someplace else. And it's four times.
I would answer that, though, by saying that that's the Doris Day and the whole world of that world, that the Young at Heart is actually what that whole story is about, that don't you know that it's worth every treasure on earth
Right.
to be young at heart.
Well, and also the opening line, fairy tales can come true.
Yeah.
Which it is a kind of fairy tale story, and maybe it's a impossible ending or a justifiable ending, but it has a certain fairy tale quality to it. You had a question.
Well, more so of an observation. When the camera, I'm going back to the scenes where you're looking into their home through the window, and it's almost like a voyeur kind of, like a voyeur sort of passing by, but stopping and seeing this perfect scene of this idyllic family. And then I think of Hitchcock with Rear Window, and James Stewart looking out of his window, watching various people in the various apartments. But there's almost a sinister element to it.
Say again?
There is almost a sinister element to it, that you're intruding on their little life of perfection but somehow there's something unsettling about that as well.
No, I think that's a great point. I think voyeurism has a complicated role to play in films of the 50s. On the one hand, if it's something nice and wonderful, why not look at it and appreciate it as you're walking by? On the other hand, as you say, there's a kind of undercurrent. There's a song, and I think it's slightly later, but is exactly about seeing the wrong thing through a window, and that's the song Silhouettes. Do you know that? I went home to your house late last night. All the shades are pulled way down tight, because he's actually, and we discover he's on the wrong block. He said, I discovered I'm on the wrong block. I ran home, and you and I will now be two silhouettes on the shade. But that idea that suddenly it can all turn, it can go wrong, and that's sort of, as you point out, what happens in Rear Window. At first, it's just an idle pastime, but then he starts to see things he shouldn't see. And in a way, we are the voyeurs. I mean, the camera moves in with us at the beginning in this film that we just saw. And even though it's supposed to be perfect, a lot of bad things happen. People marry the wrong people. Marriages fall apart. People cry in kitchens. So we're seeing the buoyancy, we're seeing the uplift. We're also seeing melodrama, drama plus.
There seems to be this underlying tension with this overriding attempt to make it look like this perfect.
Right, and I think one version of that is that we do also see their life in New York, and it's not gingerbread, and it's not perfect, and they're desperately trying to keep their love. So we're seeing things about life in this buoyant, uplifting gay film that are also not so buoyant and joyful. People are struggling.
I want to add something though, that the 30s film of Four Daughters starts out that way too. It starts out exactly the same. You're outside, the camera goes in, and you see them playing music. This time you see Aunt Jessie watching television and him playing the flute. But in the original 30s version, you come in through the window and they're all playing music, which is the second scene when we see in Young at Heart where they're playing music. But it's actually the first scene in Four Daughters. You come in through the window and they're playing music together with the father. And he's very badly conducting. I'm a musician, so this time at least he's conducting properly. In the first version of the 30s, it's terrible. He's waving two hands and conducting, which anybody who's been trained in conducting, which I've done a little bit of training in conducting, you don't conduct like that. But it's the exact same opening, coming in through the window and they're playing music and you see it. So that was actually just copied right out of the first one from the 30s.
Other thoughts you guys have? Yeah.
Well, I worked in the medical profession for years. The movies just drive me insane. I'm thinking like Babyface with Barbara Stanwyck. Warren Williams shoots himself. She's in the ambulance with the attendant, and they're operating, and the attendant says, "Oh, he'll be fine." They don't operate in ambulances. And the same thing for this movie. If he was in a serious auto accident, you've got the golden hour. The family gets there. He should be in surgery right now. He shouldn't be lying in bed for a lengthy period of time.
With a cigarette.
With a cigarette.
And his wife sort of hugging him, right? Yeah.
Right.
In fact, after that horrible accident, 3-4 months later, he'd still be a mess.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think there's kind of, whether it's motivated or not, there is a kind of fairy tale quality to the very ending. He's recuperated so much. Very minor.
Of course, the baby was quite a bit older then. I mean,
right.
That was that was way past 9 months later. That was a year and a half later.
Right.
I mean, spring.
Yeah.
The puppy was a newborn, and then all of a sudden it's just a full-grown dog.
Yeah.
That was.
Well, and if I'm not mistaken, we do not see the puppy in the last scene.
No, we do. We see a dog.
We do? Okay.
Yeah. But remember, this is the 50s, and in the 50s, I just have to warn you, we have to remember that there were two kinds of films going on back then. We start getting into the really gritty, family, realistic films like Rebel Without a Cause and East of Eden. We get those really gritty family films in the 50s, but we also get those beautiful Americana utopian films of, The Good Neighbors and all of those happy family things going on that make us feel like everything is wonderful in America films. And that's what this kind of a film is. But the one in the 30s, I just want to throw back for a minute with Four Daughters. It's during the Depression, and there's one scene where, she let me use your stockings and let me wear your dress and let me wear your jewelry, but they live in a beautiful house and it doesn't feel like anybody's suffering financially at all. So there's a washing of the whole world of what it's like to be in the real world, even in the 30s Depression version of this, where Jeffrey Lynn comes and they're worried about a squeaky gate, and Max Steiner does his Mickey Mousing with the music playing exactly against the squeaky gate, and the Mickey Mousing of Max Steiner's score drives me nuts. And Mickey Mousing, because I come from sound effects, is where the music matches the action of something and matches it and it's so completely that it's almost the sound effecty matching of it. We call it Mickey Mousing because it comes from the whole cartoony side of it. So there is this tendency in a lot of this Hollywoody musical type or filmmaking to not present things realistically in a lot of these classic American films. And that's why I point out that at least it's interesting in this one that while we had that happy ending, we also had a black couple walking away. So there's this sense of something that's a little more realistic happening that I thought was very interesting. What an interesting thing to throw in in a film that had such a strange ending.
And I don't want to make too much of it, but this clash between a gritty side of American film and a fairy tales can come true side.
Yeah.
I see it even in the attitude of the assistant manager at the saloon.
Yes.
Who at first is, boy, get to work.
Yeah.
And the minute Laurie turns her, she converts everybody.
All
she has to do is say, aren't you so-and-so's dad? I went to school with her. And immediately, he's a nice guy. He's respectful of the Sinatra
And isn't
character.
that exactly that's actually how it works. It's like, oh, yes, and all of a sudden he starts treating Barney Sloane with respect. And that, something that I noticed, it's like Alex is disdainful of Barney when Barney actually is more talented.
Right.
Because Alex is of the manor born, and Barney comes from the lower classes and has had to work his way up. That class issue is underplayed but very clear, and Laurie and Aunt Jess pick up on it and are sympathetic to it. But Alex never loses his slight contemptuous treatment of Barney.
Yeah, you had another,
Another observation, it feels like a film about a family drama, and then the songs are embellishments.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, what you were saying about the music match to the action and this kind of what they call Mickey Mousing. There is a little bit of it at the end when he's doing the suicide attempt. We get, and it's
Yes.
interesting that,
With the window
window
wipers.
dunk, dunk, dunk,
Dunk,
and
dunk,
it's
dunk.
playing against the song he hasn't yet finished, which is building in intensity, and what finally allows this fairy tale to come true is that he finishes the song. He gives it, as she says.
And yet it really isn't any different. It's exactly the same melody. There really isn't much more to it,
Right.
which I found really interesting. Being a songwriter, it's like, there really isn't much different to it except it's orchestrated.
All right.
Oh, and the lyrics.
Yeah, and yes,
Adds
my
the
love,
lyrics.
you, my love, my love, my love. Right. Anything else? We should probably break soon.
Time for one more question if there's one more question. Okay, if not, let's thank our wonderful presenters.
Thank you so much for coming.